Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, following the 3 H's of the channel, and in this video, it's all about the state of California. So, if that sounds like something you're interested in, definitely pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. This is something that happened when I was working on Mount Tamalpais. It was night 3 into camping there. I had been doing trail work in the literal rainforest for 3 days. I was hiking in lumber to build a bridge on a trail 3 miles away. I wake up around 2 a.m. I hear my coworker's voice. He is making this stupid noise that he would normally do if he got lost in the woods. And I hear this constantly for 30 minutes. I debate getting dressed and making sure that he didn't get lost on the way to the bathroom or something. I go out to the road, not far from the state property that we're on. I walk along the highway for a couple minutes before I get too frustrated trying to find the source of the noise. I start to think maybe he just snuck off to get high. I end up just going back to bed. I see him the next morning. I say, "Hey T, what were you doing last night?" He says that he passed out in his tent after emptying his flask. He was there all night because he didn't want the boss to know that he had alcohol while working. I kept hearing the same voice for the next 3 nights, coming from the same direction until we left at the end of the week. After that, I kept mentioning that I was hearing his voice at night. He told me that he thought it was me doing it to make fun of him. Another time some weird stuff happened was probably when I was at one of the more recent Yosemite fires. Basically, I was doing fire watch. My shifts were 16 hours or more straight, and I was on someone's ranch. And at that point, it hadn't been a good week for the USFS because some hotshot captain got himself killed about a week prior, and an entire camp had to be evacuated. So one night, after dinner, the smoke rolls in extra thick, and it makes looking across the camp more difficult than usual. I finish up cleaning and taking out the garbage around the camp when I walk up to my tent. I look toward the tree line, and I see a malnourished buck. I don't think much of it because deer are super common in this part of the Sierras. I hear my coworker walking up. Before I can turn around to say hi, I see the deer get up on 2 legs and run off into the tree line. At that moment, I was much too confused to be scared. I was just trying to piece together in my head what I had just seen. I swing around. I ask my coworker if he saw that. He says, "Saw what?" And I just said never mind, and never told him about it. And the last one I have for you isn't mine, but it's a guy that I worked with from this camp. It's his story, and I'll tell it from his point of view. He was on hour 8 or 12, clearing out cabins in the Tuolumne National Forest. He finds this cabin off this random forest road while the fire's coming up the road behind him, and he said, "This is the last cabin that I needed to check before I go back to the engine." On my way up the driveway, I see an abnormally large bobcat screeching at me from atop a tree. It doesn't sound like a normal bobcat, but I ignore it because I'm focusing on the cabin, hoping there's no one inside. I knock on the cabin, trying to see if anyone's there. The chimney is lit, but I'm not so sure. I pound on the door 3 times. "Hey, fire, fire, you need to leave now." I don't hear anything. I end up having to break down the door, trying to find out if anyone is in there. The smoke around me begins to get thicker. I go inside the cabin. The place is very well maintained and furnished, but no one is home. And I think, okay, maybe they already left. I run back out of the cabin, past the tree where I saw the weird bobcat that was screeching at me earlier. I turn around and I see an old Native American lady in a skirt, boots, and a jean jacket at the base of the oak tree that the bobcat was just a moment earlier. This lady's eyes are not human. She climbs up the branch 10 feet off the ground, the same way that a bobcat would, and then she starts to shriek at me from the tree. But she sounds like a bobcat. I'm more afraid of burning alive than whatever the hell is going on here, and whatever she has planned for me, and I don't want to stick around. So I tell her to leave, and I book it back to the engine and back to camp. So after he told us this, I was about to ask some questions, but then this other guy, who is from the Bureau of Indian Affairs from New Mexico, and he's turned about 5 shades paler, and he tells our friend to please not talk about this anymore, and don't tell anybody, and don't search cabins like that alone. He asks why, but he never really got a real answer. But given the stories I've read on the internet, you can probably connect the dots. What's weird though, is that the deer incident that I mentioned earlier happened the very next day after he told us the story. This story happened several years ago to a childhood friend. We're no longer in contact, but I heard it on several occasions, and the story never changed. So, I think I can do it justice, so here goes. This story concerns a childhood friend named Billy and his then boyfriend. They eventually got married, Andrew, back in the summer of 1996. At the time, they were both working in a hospital in Orange County, California, driving from nearby Riverside County, which was cheaper in regards to rent. They had been getting tired of the long drive back from work each day and were trying to find affordable accommodations closer to work, but to no avail. That is, until they attended Andrew's family reunion. At the reunion, the boys happened to mention their troubles with housing, and someone came up and said, "Why don't you live at Aunt So-and-so's house in Brea, which is a city in northern Orange County?" As it happens, some distant member of the family had inherited his late aunt's house and had kept it in good condition. This was for his children to live in and eventually inherit. The kids, though, never wound up setting foot in the place at all and went off to live in various spots around the world. So it had been sitting empty for years, with the bills being paid, gardeners visiting infrequently. Andrew and Billy agreed to take over the utilities and the property taxes, and they were soon residents of the OC. Around a month after moving in, they began to notice a couple of minor anomalies. The first was that their dogs seemed to watch invisible things moving around their new home and barking at these things occasionally. They laughed it off as 2 small insects that they couldn't see, or the dogs just being silly. The second was that they began to notice random cold spots around the home that didn't seem to be too consistent. They knew that it wasn't the AC because they had not been consistently serviced over the years, and they had not yet gotten around to having a repairman over, so they agreed that they couldn't figure out what it was, and they should ask Andrew's relation. I can't remember how they were related the next time they spoke. After another month or so, the knocking started. They began to hear random knocks on the walls from time to time, but they could never catch anyone in the act outside. Soon, the knocks were heard from either roof or floor, sometimes all surfaces simultaneously. They were still believing that it was somebody playing a prank on the quote gay couple. So Billy set up a tripod and camera covering 2 sides of the house outside, the yard, and then another on the roof. After a set of knockings would occur, he would run and check the camera footage, but nothing was ever seen to account for the knocks. They were both perplexed, but not overly concerned yet. That soon changed though, They began coming home to find their front door wide open. This would freak them out, but since they felt like that they could take care of themselves, as they were both pretty buff, they would always go charging in and always find nothing. Inside, nothing was ever disturbed or missing, but the dogs would be found cowering in their kennels. The door opening gradually spread to other doors in the home as well, with each accusing the other at first, and then giving up as the activity continued. Soon, drawers and cabinets in the kitchen were opening as soon as someone left the room, or even when they entered in the morning, and at this point, Billy began suggesting to Andrew that the house may be haunted. Having grown up with me, we were way into the paranormal. I'm surprised he didn't get to that conclusion sooner. Andrew just rolled his eyes and said he'd figure out what was going on, but agreed to let Billy set up one of his cameras in the kitchen. The next morning, the kitchen was a mess, with open drawers and their contents all over the floor. Eagerly watching the footage, both were amazed to watch every drawer and cabinet fling open simultaneously in the middle of the night, and then cups and bowls and utensils being flipped out one by one over a few minutes. Billy felt that he was vindicated, but Andrew said something along the lines of, "Maybe we have rats," and stormed out of the room. Not long after this occurred, the event that changed Andrew's mind to match his boyfriend's happened. One day, Andrew decided to give the dogs a bath and locked both him and the dogs in the bathroom. He used both the lock on the door handle and also a sliding bolt higher up on the door. He later said, so nothing could open the door and let the dogs escape halfway through. He was just starting on the second when the door handle began twisting and jiggling, as if someone was trying to get in. Andrew yelled out that he was bathing the dogs and to wait a moment. The jiggling stopped, but was followed a moment later by intense pounding on the door. Again, Andrew called out and told whoever it was to knock it off until he was finished. It got really quiet for a few moments. So Andrew, satisfied that the distraction was over, continued to bathe the second dog. Suddenly, they all heard scratching at the door, starting at the bottom and slowly going up to where the bolt was located on the inside of the door. There was obviously no access to it on the outside. Andrew watched in horror as the bolt handle proceeded to lift up and then slowly slide across to unlock the bolt, while the lock on the handle simultaneously twisted into the open position. The door slowly swung open to reveal nothing, and both dogs started howling. Now that they were in agreement that they needed some kind of help, Billy contacted a friend of a friend who worked in Los Angeles at a new age store, and supposedly she had abilities. She agreed to come to their home a couple weeks later, and the first thing she said upon entering was that there was a very angry woman present. She proceeded to perform some type of cleansing. The boys decided to wash their cars while she was at it, and after that, they didn't have any more unnatural activity for maybe 2 weeks, and then all the phenomena started up again. They contacted the psychic again, and she came out the following weekend with 2 helpers, and asked Billy and Andrew to leave for the day. Upon returning, Billy said that the house felt different, but couldn't put it into words, and that was the last time that they had any issues there, except perhaps for one more, which I'll mention in a moment. At the next family reunion, they both shared with everyone all of the phenomena they had experienced. They were surprised to hear from the relative that had given them access to the place that Aunt so-and-so had complained about how soldiers used to walk the halls at night. She thought that this was due to her late son's collection of Civil War memorabilia. He had died in the house from pneumonia. They figured that she might have been the angry woman, and that she had died, cursing the doctors and nurses who did not save her son. All the relatives had assumed that the soldiers she claimed to see were signs of dementia. Anywho, I loved being told this story later from both of them, because they would each tell their own version. Billy would say something like, "And then we saw the door open, right in front of us," and a lot of arm waving and "oh my gods." And Andrew would say something like, "Yeah, the door opened by itself," in a very matter-of-fact way with no emotion. I totally believed them, and also totally chewed them out for not inviting me to share in the experience. And lastly, a few years later, one of Andrew's nephews spent the night staying in their guest room. The guest room had been decorated with Billy's collection of cowboy and Native American memorabilia, which Billy collected, with a big authentic headdress over the bed. I have no idea how he got it, or what tribe. The boys were surprised to find the nephew and the dog that he shared the guest bed with, both sleeping on the couch the next morning. When asked why, he said that they had just gotten tired of being woken up by the angry Indian man standing at the end of the bed. And that was sent in to me by Dawn. So thank you, Dawn, for sending this in, and I hope I could do your story justice. In February 2012, I met my friends in a church parking lot at 1800 hours. All four of us are Eagle Scouts: Will, Evan, and Brian. My name is Rob. We were all super excited. It was our first trip into the desert. I don't own guns, and I also don't own a 4x4, so all of us have to cram into Will's Ford Explorer. We all have us plus a weekend's worth of camping supplies, so you can imagine it's a little cramped. We reach our spot at 2300 hours. It's a rock shelf that overlooks Giant Rock in California. I mentioned how it's kind of like the movie The Hills Have Eyes. That movie scared the hell out of me, by the way. For some reason, it just really bothered me. Will says that there are, indeed, really weird people out here, and I think, great, this is my nightmare scenario. So we pitch our tents before it gets windy. I try to sleep. I can't. I stay up all night in the sleeping bag with Evan's shotgun, not being able to get any rest. The next day, after spending the early morning and mid-afternoon shooting, Will and I decide to go out off-roading. His Explorer, by the way, is barely street-worthy, but we go anyway. We bring water and a .22. We're having fun on this trail somewheres, but then something terrible happens. The car gets stuck in the sand. It's 3 miles directly to camp, but it's over impassable terrain. I decide to try and start digging out the vehicle with the butt of the rifle. One digs, the other looks out for help. We dig until 15:30. I say, "Dude, if somebody doesn't drive by soon, we're going to be stuck out here all night." He agrees. I lock up the car. We start walking to the Giant Rock itself. It's 2 miles away, directly. We bring the rifle and our water. We start walking. It's 110. There's no shade, and there's nobody in sight. Will mentions how this really is like The Hills Have Eyes, now that you mentioned it earlier. In my head, I'm thinking, great, bring it up again, why don't you? But what I actually said was, yeah, nervously. About a mile in, we're passing this old rusted-out Jeep. For some reason, just the vibe that Jeep gave off was seriously off, really creepy. I start to think about the movie more and more, what happened and why that it did. I'm thinking, were the owners of that rusted-out Jeep also like us, looking for help? I start to look at everything for some kind of tactical advantage over anyone or anything. There are so many large rocks, and now shadows and Joshua trees and more rocks. We can't possibly find any tactical advantage. I'm starting to panic a little bit. I ask Will if we can take a break. He says sure. I keep running the scenario through my mind, and then I see a person off in the distance. I tell Will that we need to go now. He says not to worry about it. It's probably another camper. Maybe they can help. This figure gets closer. It looks humanoid, but it walks like a slow monkey. I tell Will once again that we need to go. I turn back around to look and see where it is now. It's gone. I look at Will. He says that I must not be drinking enough water. He says that he wants to radio in Brian and Evan to let them know where we are and what happened. We attempt to make radio contact. There's nothing but static. It feels like interference. But in the static, there's a voice, a very faint voice. It says, "I'm coming." I start to get really freaked out now. I tell Will that we can't stay here. We have to continue toward the rock. And as we start off, we see that figure once again. The radio comes on, and a faint "I'm coming" is heard again. While we're trying to make sense of this, discussing what it could be, if there's somebody else that's maybe lost out here or seen us. But then, 100 yards off, a humanoid shape runs in front of us. I can't tell what it is for sure, but then we hear this weird screech off in the distance. It sounds far away, but also kind of close, just bizarre. I ask Will if he heard it too. He looks at me confused and says, "Yeah, maybe it was nothing. We should go." And I say, "Will, that wasn't just nothing." The figure appears again, closer. I tell Will to turn around. He does. He sees whatever it was and actually yells at it, takes off in a full sprint toward the figure. He doesn't even have the 22. That weird, far off but close screech is heard again, and the figure is within 20 yards, but the radiating heat made it impossible to tell how close or how far it actually was. But I take off too. I run right past the thing. It reaches out to grab me. It tears my shirt, my favorite Iron Maiden shirt, the whole thing right off of me. I keep running. I don't stop. I run right past the giant rock. I ran for probably another mile on pure adrenaline. I see a guy on a quad. I wave him down. I try to tell him what happened. He's telling me to calm down and that he has no idea what the hell I'm talking about or what I mean. But he offers me a lift to see Will. He calls his friend with a jeep to pull out the Explorer. I'm still freaking out. I'm basically in the fetal position. I can't handle all of this. The guy with the jeep shows up. I find out that he drove right by where the figure was standing when I ran past it. It's gone. There's no trace. The jeep guy didn't even know what I was talking about. But we get out Will's car. We thank them for helping us. I wanted to hug the guy. We head back towards camp. I ask Will to pull over, right by where the thing took my shirt. My shirt's gone. There's no tracks, no trace of anything. We finally get back to camp. Brian says how we all look sick and pale. Will and I just nod. We have no idea what the hell just happened. Evan says that we should eat something that might help. We agree. After eating and calming down a bit, I take the spotting scope out. I set up on the shelf to look over a dry lake bed. There's nothing important happening. A few fires in the distance, dust trails from other off-roaders. But about 4 miles out, I see a figure. It's moving very slowly. Not toward us, though. Away. I don't even bring this up to the others. That night, once again, I got very little sleep. I stayed up with the shotgun in the sleeping bag. It was very windy that night. It almost knocked all of our stuff down. When we wake up, we notice footprints all around our camp. All of us are a little freaked out. We keep the shotgun drawn while checking over our stuff. Evan and Brian think that I'm batshit crazy. I look around our fire pit. It's warm, and we're missing wood. I look into the fire pit. There are scraps of my Iron Maiden shirt and what I assume were animal bones in the pit. This really disturbs me. I tell Evan and Brian to look in it. They ask me why I burned my favorite shirt. I tell them I didn't. Evan, who doesn't really know anything that's happened up to this point, says that it's time to go and starts packing everything up. There's no hesitation from me or Will. All 4 of us drive away with our guns at the ready and the windows down. Will and I begin having a breakdown at some point. He can barely drive, so Brian takes the wheel. We're traveling down the climb. We notice 2 crosses at the side of the trail. Those crosses were not there yesterday. We then see the humanoid leaning on a Joshua tree. We yell at Brian to step on it. The creature steps out from the tree into the middle of the trail behind us. It just stands there and watches us drive away. I don't know what it was, what I saw, or anything. I'm too scared to talk about it with Will because I don't like to talk about it, and neither does he. I suppressed it immediately afterward, and it never came up until I got a reminder on my phone for the trip. I guess it's set up to do that. But screw me, I guess. This kept me up at night for 3 weeks after. I don't wear any of my maiden shirts anymore, and I refuse to go out there ever again. So, I hope you enjoyed those. And if you did, then let me know which one was your favorite one down in the comments. And if you have one of your own, or would like to donate to the channel, I have links in the description, an email and a PayPal and a Patreon, if you would like to do that. And one thing about California that always interested me was the stories of what they call the Dark Watchers, I believe they're named. They wear flowing cloaks and they have a wide-brimmed hat. Sometimes they're 7 to 15 feet tall. Some people have seen them with like a staff or something like that too. And when you try and get close to them, they just disappear. So I don't know a whole lot about them, but I thought that was cool for California. I couldn't really find any encounters or anything with them, but if I do, I'll put them in a future video. And with that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please like and subscribe, and if you are subscribed, you can tick that notification bell so that you know whenever I put up a video. And with that again, I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching. Have a good week.